Hello, my name is Kimra Reed. I'm from Columbia City, Indiana. I've been making jewelry for about 5 years, and one of my passions is recycling. So today I'm going to show you how to make my recycled braided choker, and we will be using old t-shirts, beads, and buttons. So come on, let's get started. The supplies you will need for today's project include an old t-shirt. Size extra large is the best, but you can use whatever size you have available. A tape measure, beads, a button, a pair of scissors, a pair of needle nose pliers, and an awl. And then you will need either a pair of tweezers or a pair of hemostats, then a glue gun, glue sticks, and then I also use a plastic cutting board, and that's just to catch the drippings from the glue gun, and then tape, and the tape is optional. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to cut our t-shirt into strips. So what you will do is you will lay the t-shirt out flat, and you want to take your scissors and cut below the graphics on your t-shirt. So just cut straight across. And it doesn't have to be straight because you're going to be stretching this and no one's going to see it. And so you go all the way over. And then you'll take that part and put it aside because you will use part of that later. All right, and then what I do is I cut the hem, and you can try to line this up as best you can, but if you don't and it's jagged, it's not going to show. So you will start and just cut off the hem. And put that aside. Now you're going to start making strips. And I usually try to make them at least an inch wide, maybe a little bit wider. And once again, they do not have to be straight, they do not have to be even. They do not even have to be the same width all the way down. Okay, now that I've cut the shirt, I have about 10 or 11 strips. There is no specific number of strips that you need to have. You just cut the shirt into however many that you can get, anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inches wide. Next, we're going to take each strip and we're going to stretch it. So what you do is you pull it from end to end and you pull it out as far as you can both ways. And stretch it out until it's a thin strip. And you're going to do that with each piece that you have here. Okay, now that we've stretched each piece, we're going to pick them up individually, and then we're going to cut them in half. And this one's a little tangled here. There we go. So what you're going to do is you're going to just cut, and then go down to the end, and cut again. And you're going to do this with each stretched piece that you have. Just untangle that, and just line them up. And they don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be the exact same length. I'm going to stretch this one just a little bit farther. There we go. I like to stretch them as far as I can. Now that I have cut all of my t-shirt strips, I'm going to divide them into piles of equal number. So I'm just going to start out with 3 in each stack. I'm sure I have much more than that, so I can add to this. The number of strips that you have will determine the width of your choker. So if you want a thick choker, you would cut this down and not have as many strips in each separate pile. It's up to you, but I will show you examples of that at the end when we are finished. Okay, now at this point, I really only need 2 stacks. So I need to decide, do I want a thin or do I want a thick? So I'm going to make this a thin one. So really, I just need to use 6 strands, but I'm going to pull this one out because it's a little bit wider. I want to try to have each strand about the same width. Okay, so now that we are done, I will take these and lay them over to the side. I will also use some of these strips to use as ties. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to line these up as best I can, and I'm going to take one of my other strips and I'm going to just tie these together. And I usually just pull it once, kind of tight, and then I trim, And I discard my small pieces, but hold on to this piece to use as the tying piece. Okay, now that I've tied my pieces together, I'm going to show you how to braid. You will separate your 3 pieces, and then you will take, this is my left, this is the right. I take the left piece and put it over the middle strand. And then I will take the right piece and put it over this strand. And then I kind of pull them tight to fill in the space, but you can have it loose if you like. Then I just keep going. I put the left strand over the middle, and that strand then becomes the middle strand. Then I put the right strand over. So it's just basically going back and forth, alternating. And the piece in the middle stays there. And then you just keep going this way. And you just do this until you get to the end. Okay, now I have finished braiding my first strand, so I'm going to tie it off at the end. And so I just pick a spot close to the end here where everything lines up. And once again, I just use one of the material strips and tie. I'm just going to trim this down is basically what I'm going to do, as close to my knot as I can. And actually, I'm going to do that on to the other end also. So you end up with a braided rope. And so now I'm going to lay this aside, and I'm going to pick up my other stack of strands. And once again, I'm going to tie off. I'm just going to go ahead and trim this one. And then I'm going to start braiding my 3 strands. Left over center, then right, then left, and then right, just like we did before, until I come to the end of my strands. Now that I've finished braiding my second strand, I'm going to tie this off. And then once again, I'm trimming. Now, if you trim too close, don't panic. You can always just move up and tie it off again. And then we're going to discard our little pieces. Okay, now I have 2 strands. And what I want to do is I want to lay them next to each other. And as you can see, one's a little wider than the other, but that's okay because that's what makes this project eclectic. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring in our beads. I strongly recommend that you buy bonded beads. And by that, I mean beads that are all together. These are not threaded. These are not strung. They're bonded. And I will show you what I mean, because when you cut your beads in half, that bead cannot come off. Neither can this one. So they won't come apart. They won't break and ruin your project at some future point in time. So now, to braid, my bead is going to become my middle strand for this beading project. And what I do is I don't cut my beads. I leave them long. So this is where the tape comes in, because sometimes it's easier to just tape down here, tape it to the table or whatever surface it is you're working on, so that it keeps everything straight and keeps it from moving or slipping. Or what I do is I take my piece that I've been tying with, and I'm going to come down here. I'm going to just line these up. I've got enough beads that I'm going to just maybe let that hang off the end a little bit. And then I'm going to tie these together. Okay, I try to get right underneath a bead. And I pull this tight. Now when I get to this step, I usually double tie. And yes, it's a little bulky, but we'll be covering that up later. And the tighter you pull, the less bulky it is. All right, so I'm going to trim this. And then I'm going to cut these extra beads off. And now I start braiding. Now that I have braided my 3 pieces together, we're down at the end, and once again we're going to tie off. And I tie this twice because I want to make sure that this holds and does not come apart. Okay, now I'm going to trim my tie pieces, and then I am going to cut my bead. And then I am going to trim the braided pieces. Okay, now I have my piece. This is our choker. And usually it's the correct size, but you might want to hold this up, put it around your neck, and make sure that it's going to reach. If it's too long, you can cut, you can tie off and cut just like we did the ends to make it shorter if you need to. So what I usually like to do though is to take the tape measure and just get some idea of how long it is, because really it should be somewhere between 14 and 16 inches because that's usually where the average neck size. Okay, so now we are going to put this piece aside for a minute, and we are going to get our button, and I'm going to grab my awl and my tweezers. I will have my hemostat here if I need it. Okay, so now I want to thread a piece of this onto my button. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a strip, and it can be a couple of inches long. And then I'm going to cut it in the middle because I want to tie this onto my button. So I have these 2 thin pieces. I always like to make a little angle so that it's easier to feed. And then I feed it through the opening on the back of my button. And so this is where my awl comes in because it kind of helps me push that through. And then I will take my tweezers and see if I can pull it through. And sometimes when it's a little difficult, I will take my hemostats because I can lock these and I can get a better grip. And then it helps me pull. Okay, now this is the split. So I'm just going to line that up, and then once again I'm going to tie this off here. And I always tie this at least twice. Now, I'm going to trim the pieces that I tied. And I have, on occasion, if I thought maybe it would come apart, I have applied a little bit of glue here to help hold that in place. And so usually I just kind of test it and pull everything tight. And if it seems like it's going to hold and be okay, I don't apply any glue there. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our piece, and we are going to glue this on for our closure. So, I take my glue gun and just put need an extra stick here. And I just put a little piece of glue right here. And then I just lay this over that. And I leave a little bit off at the end. And then I take my awl, because it's hot, so please be careful. I just kind of press that on there, and when it's cooled, I'll use my finger. Okay, now I'm going to go to the other end, and here I'm going to make my loop. So what I usually do is that I try to make a loop that's going to be, you know, about the same size as my button. Kind of go around and see, maybe a little bit smaller. And I cut. And then I glue. And put a little piece here on the opposite end. And I attach this, and of course I leave a little extra. Measure it again just to kind of make sure. And then I just glue the other side. Now this gets a little messy and stringy, but just make sure you pull the strings off and pull them away. Okay. So now I'm going to go to the button end, let the other end cool. And I am going to trim my excess. And then I'm going to take one of my pieces that I had cut earlier, and I'm going to wrap with this. So I'm going to start at the end where I attach the button piece. Get our strings out of the way here. And I'm just going to start wrapping around. And I kind of pull this a little tight just to bring it in so it's not bulky. And I am going to cut this bead off. And maybe even trim this down a little bit more. And I think I'm going to put a piece of glue here to help hold this in place, because we're going to be going around the button now. And I think I'm also going to put another piece here. So you can add the glue as you think you need to, just to hold it in place where you would like for it to be. Pull this out and make sure that it's all secure. And then I'm going to cut this off right at the end where I'm going to glue. Now be careful when you're putting your glue on, because if you get too big of a glob, it'll ooze out, and then you'll have glue on your piece and you'll have to try to pick that off, and sometimes that's not easy to do. Okay, so there we go. So this end is done. And now we'll go to the other end. And we're going to trim down our loop. And I'm going to trim off any other little excess pieces that I don't think I need. Okay, so with one of the extra pieces, I'm going to put a piece of glue right here on the end. And I'm going to run that through just to kind of cover up those cut ends. And we'll cut that. And I don't glue it, but you could glue it down if you wanted to. And then I'm going to start wrapping. Just pull like we did before. Make sure everything's kind of lined up. And you're going to wrap that right around the end. I'm going to snip it, and I'm going to glue. And I'm going to get that excess glue off of there. Okay, now I'm going to go back and I'm just going to trim off some of the pieces that we had that were long. And there you have it. There is the choker. You have your button end and you have your loop end, and you're going to bring these around and you're going to button. And there you go. I would like to show you some others that I have made. I have added a couple of different things, but this one is using 2 different colored t-shirts. And I actually used 3 strands in each braid. And then I just used the beads as the middle, just like I did the other one, but my closure's different. I used just a regular necklace closure, so that's one option that you can use. Here's one with multicolored t-shirt material and multicolored beads, and this one had the button closure. Here's one that I used an old bracelet with. This is an old wrap bracelet that I no longer wanted, and so I used it instead of the beads, and then I embellished the end with some beads around the button. So you could embellish any of these if you so choose. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you had fun making this project. Please look forward to more videos coming soon on JewelryLessonVideos.com. Thanks again.